Hi, this is Falk and I will walk you through the most important administration capabilities of InMineCloud and how you can easily set up the system, the configuration, the pricing, and other interesting areas. So first of all, I walk you through the initial setup where to see the licenses that are assigned to you, the how to set up the organizational structure, a few key master data items such as document types and so on. And from there, we will go to one of the key areas of InMineCloud, product configuration and pricing. So I walk you through how to manage products, setup configuration, constraints, bill of materials, and from there into pricing, the pricing schema, how to manage price lists, and those kind of things. Then we go into the more fancy features such as configuring a home screen, how to set up a guided selling, how to change the user interface, hide elements, rename elements, and so on. And as last item, I want to show you integration capabilities, batch jobs, and how to use a general purpose language called Groovy to implement own integration points for point-to-point integration without a middleware. So let's talk about the initial setup. So there are two starting points. One is kind of standalone usage, and the other one is integrated scenario with an ERP or a CRM system. So in the scenario that we have an integrated scenario, we would first establish the connection and replicate required master data. So let me quickly show how that looks like for instance, SAP ERP. So we would set up the connectivity with SAP, either via VPN or VPC peering in AWS, and then replicate data before we start with configuring the rest of the system. Let me come back to the integration parts, which data is replicated, how to set it up, and all those kind of things later. Let's start with a tour through the admin work centers in InMineCloud. So the core of the administration, obviously, products, product catalogs, categories, bundles, product substitution, administration area here with a lot of capabilities, including license management, organizational units, and those kind of things. System processes more related to replication and batch jobs that are running in the background. Model is more about management of classes for categories of products that carry the same characteristics, script management, and those kind of things. Lookup tables, very powerful concept, mainly used for managing price lists in a very flexible way, but can also be used to influence our application behavior. And one of the core things is, of course, the price schema management, which determines how to calculate prices, how to capture costs, and those kind of things. So let's start with the key essential things to be looked at when a tenant is provisioned. Right, so first of all, when a customer signs up, the customer can manage or see his licenses, right? Assign licenses to users and see license assignments that he did in the past. For instance, I can assign licenses to those. Another important area is first to create the company in the system. So that's uploading logos, key addresses, and all those kind of things, and the organizational structure. so which can be a hierarchy view. So there are a little bit more here, as you can see. Some of them are CS organizations, CS offices, CS groups, and there's also a hierarchy view, which looks like this, and corporate CS US as an example, and can manage a lot of things about this CS organization in the screen. Let's go back. What else is relevant? So we have the concept of employees. So employee is not necessarily a user, but can be used, for instance, as a reference in a quotation, with or without being assigned a user. And this is the user management as an example. So here you also have the list of commerce users, which are derived from contacts. So that can be managed also from an account by the sales reps to provision commerce users for customers, so they can sign up through self-service way, management of sales teams, and also some usage statistics here, for instance, for the logins. You could understand the usage statistics of your system. So a few other data points are required. For instance, to create a quote, you need to specify at least one quote type. So that's the CS document type in this case. You need at least one. Right, and there's a lot of other minor data points, and what we usually do is we give the customer a template with all that data points, and he fills this Excel and uploads it as one shot to the system. And we also have the capability to download all the configuration data from the system, manage it in Excel, and re-upload it. So that makes it easy for the customer to manage the application and get started. So we walk now through a few work centers which are used for managing the application. Usually your application is ready to start when you upload it in Excel. And let's go to a more interesting area, a little bit less dry, the product catalog and product categories. So product categories are organized in hierarchies, can be replicated from an ERP backend or pushed by a middleware through API into our system. Same for the products itself. So there's a standard replication mechanism with ERP backends. It can be pushed through middleware into our system through API, or initial load or the management can be done through Excel up and download. I will be using a few products throughout my introduction. So first thing is something which we call Authentic Solution. So that's inspired by Satislow. That has multiple levels, right? So here are a few, so it's basically production line that needs to be configured. There are a few kind of pre-built solutions. There's a little bit of requirements, selection, so which lens diameters do you want to produce? Selection of machines for this production line, so there's a kind of fixed process, and there are different options depending, for instance, on how much lenses or which types of lenses you want to produce, right? And then you can, for instance, if you select a certain, let's say, productivity, you get less options and a pre-built solution here. And what you see, it's a multi-level configuration, and you will have then a second level where you can select a few more options of the specific machine, right? And then you will derive a bill of material for this, right? And in this case, it's a bill of material of configured machines. The other example, which I would like to use, premium sauna. So here we have, for instance, inputs for the size of a room, a few derived calculation from there, which the volume determines then the heating power required, right? 9 kilowatt, or let me increase the room here. A few selections for the interior. The heating power influences the oven which is available. Right, let me reduce the size again a little bit. Like here, we have more options. And yeah, and a little bit of services are built in, such as assembly. Next, for the configuration, I like to use a more engineered product, which is linear motor. So here we can have a guidance by attributes that the customer is looking for, right? You see that the list of options gets smaller, but I can also omit this guidance. Let me quickly reset. At the end, what we want to do is we want to find a certain type of motor. So let me pick this one. It has a certain stroke length, right? This motor can go back and forth. The length is flexible, and then we see certain attributes that this motor carries, and could even generate a CAD, but that we talk about later. What I want to use this example for is to explain constraints. So usually or often our customers have such tables available of combinations that are valid, and I will show you at this example how to upload them. And you see also that generates a bill of material here, which is a little bit more engineering driven. So it creates the covers, the base, the motor, and this generates also the pricing. And you see here, this is driven by a quantity price here, so I will use that also example for pricing. Another interesting example for pricing is this window calculator. So very basic configuration. Here are the dimensions drive the pricing. And a forklift, also an interesting example. So here on top, the guided selling, then the model selection, a little bit here, the control of the imagery, and interesting from an explanation point of view will be that it has a combination of pricing in the bill of material, but also plain feature pricing, which we can see in here. Let's now examine these two products, and I keep the actual user view on this side, and we open the administration view on the right side. Size a little bit. So what you see here on the right is the admin screen, and here you see the actual configurator and the quote. Right, so this is the overview. You see there's a similarity. We have the general administration view. we have here what you see is what you get editor for managing product information, languages, different types of labels. We have here also attachments which are visible here. We have now related products would be recommendations, and the core element is the knowledge base, which we see here. So there could be multiple knowledge bases. We can duplicate them, we can download them, and so on. And if we want to introduce a new configuration, I can replicate this, work on it, and ensure that it goes live on that date. So this is the core of the configuration, the attributes. Right, you can add new ones here. You can, let's look at maybe the quick selection here on the top. Right, so there's a little bit of control elements. Okay, this is a matrix control 3 times 2. There are various other types of controls available. There is certain control parameters or which help filtering. Is that, for instance, mandatory, price relevant, hidden, this kind of things. Right, let's look into the range, which are the values of the attributes. So you see the name here, we use only codes. So we can also give long descriptions here, localizations of the attribute itself, and even attachments to the attribute. Right, so to describe this. There's also a grouping, right here, quick selection configuration, and so on. And also on the grouping, we could add descriptions so that it guides the user on what needs to be done. So triggers is a very important part. So triggers are rules, if you want so. So we see here most important, there's are rules to control the bill of material, which we have seen here. Right. Then there are rules which control the range restrictions. Right. We use something which is very similar to variant tables in SAP. So combinations of compatible values. So let's maybe look in here. So this is now the restrictions among those products. And here the list of values. So we look later on at a better example. And then knowledge base snapshots are versions. So we talked about the bill of material. I think I forgot to show that. So here that's just one bill of material used for this product. It could be also multiple. And here we have all the items that can be controlled from rules from this product configuration. Right, so this is kind of a super bill of material, and there are various control settings and so on. So that's this product. So let's look at the sauna example, which is really nice example because it's fairly simple, right? We calculate a little bit the volume. We set the required heating power, which has influence on the heating technology that can be chosen. And on top we have calculation here of the material requirement that we need a certain amount of wood in this case to build the sauna. Again, let's look at it at a split screen. So again, on the left, the configuration for the user, and on the right, the administration view. So again, we have bill of material, we have the knowledge base to which we go in. I skip all the explanation of the attributes and so on. Let's just spend some time on the trigger. So what we didn't discuss before was, for instance, the conditional trigger. Right, so here you see when I choose and unchoose Hemlock, the corresponding style will be set for the interior style and the bedding style, and that's conditional trigger. So I can easily add a new trigger here, and I can say, okay, if the interior style is, for instance, equal to Hemlock, we set the action, and there are a couple of different options here. So I can assign a value, I can set a default value, which is changeable by the user. So that's two different behaviors. I can copy the attribute value to a child, for instance. I can change the visibility, whether it's read-only and so on. That's a meta attribute. I can trigger recommendations, or I can trigger a validation, which gives feedback to the user if something is wrong, or he should consider another option, this kind of things. And what we do right now is we set a value, and then I can just select, for instance, any of the values. So in this case, it would be the bedding style, in German Liegeeinrichtung, and can set this to a certain value. So that's the conditional trigger. I also wanted to show the relation between the heating power and the heating power here, and the heating technology, the oven. So that's okay. That's the bill of material. This is the range restriction between the heating power and the heating technology. So here you see compatible values, and I can easily add more of this. There's also the calculation, right, from the dimensions to the volume and the wall and ceiling area. So there are a couple of ways to achieve that. The most simple version that we have is a basic calculation, arithmetic expression. So I say, okay, here the volume should be set according to the product of the length, width, and depth. That's a very basic kind of expression. You see, we pass the input, match it to the attributes, and with that, it's configured. The other way is using scripting. We have a domain-specific language which is called IMC script. So let's look at this script. There's a lot of boilerplate here. The most important part is this one. So we read the length, width, and height. The same we do here for the class front. Then we calculate the area, the volume, and so on. And you see it's very basic. And then we write it back to the configuration. So there's a lot of things that can be done in between. And you see also here that here's the ranges which set the so if there's a certain volume, that sets the ranges for the oven in this case. IMC scripts can be also connected to lookup tables, so that let's say these values don't need to be maintained here, or they can read additional data for the calculations, can be also reading cost or other things from tables that might be replicated from ERP. And it's actually a built-in environment. So you see I can activate and deactivate it. I have here some autocomplete capabilities. So that's a domain-specific language, and I can use certain example quotes. Let's say the quote which we were working on here, and a certain line item in this quote for testing. Here's the sauna, and I can verify the script that it's doing the right thing. This can be also used for test automation. The other example which I wanted to show at the sauna is example how we set the quantity of the child item. So that's very basic. We say, okay, there's an attribute which is the area, and we need to set that as a quantity for the wood that is required. So that's how it looks like. We set the quantity, and that reflects in the quantity here, and we have a cost per unit price per square meter, and actually calculate the cost and the price based on this. My last example, which I want to walk through for the configuration admin and modeling, is this linear motor. This is interesting because we build a more, I would say, production bill of material. Not down to the screw, but most important components. So you have certain requirements which the customer has, and those drive selections of the motor, which has the right power to drive the application. There are certain requirements that can be followed to get to certain dimensions of this linear motor. And once the dimensions are determined, we need certain parts such as the cover, the base, and so on, which need to have certain dimensions. And you also see that the pricing here, again, is driven by quantities. So that's also another area which is interesting. Let me again reset the configuration and show a lot of attributes here. So there's this mode which shows all the parameters that are there. So the customer might have certain requirements to fit this motor into a certain area. I show you how this works, the hiding and showing of things. I show you how the guidance works here when have certain requirements on the height, for instance, how this will lead us to a certain motor and stroke length that will be used following the kind of engineering requirements which this customer here, for instance, has captured even before using in MineCloud in tables, dependency tables, so it's very easy to upload them. And I will show you how the bill of material is derived. On top, I will show you how that all looks in Excel, which is a very common way to model a product. So do the initial product modeling and uploading the dependencies, because you can copy and paste from your existing material, and you can do a lot of things in very few clicks and use Excel capabilities to copy cells and those kind of things to quickly come up with the product configuration. So let's go again into this split screen mode. Again, on the left, the user view, and on the right, the product maintenance view. And we first look at the bill of material here. So the customer has, in this case, usually the requirement that he can either follow the kind of automated build, which we'll look at later. So the customer can also select those items right from here if you want to do a manual build. So you can choose certain covers that are available as per standard. From this, so this is the bill of material that's used for the product configuration, and we will look at this in a moment. And don't spend much time on the other things. So first of all, let's look at this guided mode and the upload capabilities. If the user wants to go through the standard, so again, we see this big table here, which is managed inside the system. And let's download the knowledge base in its Excel format. So that works like this. And we could add additional rules by adding here more parameters, but we just want to have a look in this case. So that's the downloaded version of the knowledge base. You see we have again, we have here all relevant information in one Excel sheet for easily managing it. So I can modify the bill of material here. I can work with the attributes and all of their, let's say, controlling attributes, whether they are mandatory, price relevant, the control, labels, and so on. Here are the values that are available for all the attributes, the grouping, so configuration and parameters for the CAD drawing, which we look at later. I can also define global attributes which control behavior such as sales org, country, or other things. And what I first wanted to show here is the standard dependencies, which look like this. So this is something which the customer take from his existing Excel sheets on how he manages the products, and simply upload this. So those tables reflect on these three parameter tables which the customer maintains anyhow. So here we see also the dependencies with respect to the motor with certain technical specifications. We also can look at how to activate attributes for the guided mode. So here we choose to hide specific attributes. We could also hide complete groups. So if the guided selection is equal to no, we hide certain attributes. If it's yes, we show certain attributes. So that's very easy to maintain, right? So if I want to add a new line, I can say, okay, let's take something else. Maybe here, if a certain model is equal to some value, I can do certain operations, hide, show, make read only, assign a value somewhere, and easily set up the full model within this Excel sheet. So again, this and this that reflects in the system too. This button, right? So we see a lot of attributes were hidden that lead to the motor selection. I could also do it right away. But if the customer has certain requirement on the space, width, and so on, I can follow this. So next, what I wanted to show is the dependencies that create the bill of material. So that's very simple. Follows the dimensions, right? So first of all, we have the motor, right? So if I choose a certain motor, I will have a bill of material explosion. The same for the covers or the base. Let's look at the base, right? So if I have a certain width, I see need the base with a certain dimension. You see here we have two items in the bill of material, the base and the top, which is 178 millimeter. Same for the 202 here, right? So base and top and bottom are both 202 millimeters. The end cover is depending on 2 dimensions. So that's very similar, right? So to maybe visualize this, that is basically here the top cover, the bottom cover, and then the cover at the end and at the beginning. And in the bill of material for the beginning and end, we have in our bill of material, we have a quantity 2 in certain cases. How does this reflect in the Excel sheet? Very similar. So here we have the carriage with the dimensions, and we reference a certain entry in the bill of material, which is here. So that could be also material numbers, which make it easier to maintain. That's usually done, but this is a demo. We have the end covers here. We have the base here, and this kind of export makes it very easy for product management and our customers to look at the overall product model, do mask changes, and those kind of things. All right, that were the basics on the configuration. Let's look into pricing. So you see here there are various prices, and what we want to look at is how to define, for instance, this aggregation of prices, how the lookup of the list prices work with country-specific pricing, how the variant pricing works, and in general, how the pricing is configured in InMineCloud. So let's first look at the pricing schema. So first of all, we could have multiple pricing schemas which are controlled via a few pricing indicators, which are usually the document type, could be quote, order, certain different types of quotes, and so on. And usually also sales organizations and those kind of indicators. So here in our demo system, we have one pricing procedure. And this determines how the price is calculated. This can be set up by the customer in whichever way he wants. So here an example for the list price. First of all, pricing step can be defined for a certain product type. So there might be different kind of products, service products, subscription, components, spare parts, for which a certain pricing step applies. And then you have different types of pricing steps and price item types enable certain parameters in the user interface. So for instance, this one is a lookup-based pricing step, and it references 2 price tables. One is the country list price, and there's another one, standard list price. So let's start with this and look at the lookup tables for pricing. So as mentioned earlier, lookup tables are a generic concept, but the most important application is pricing. So here is, for instance, the table for the standard list price. So you see a lot of entries. You can manage this via Excel up and download so that you can update your price lists. You can manage it in the system. So here you see a lot of more details on the price and how it's determined. So you could have different kind of scales and unit of measures. Important to mention that could be also replicated from another system. So there's a standard replication of tables available. So let's look at quickly at the country list price, which is up here. Right. So the application would first look in the country list price and then in the standard list price and provide a price based on the price list. So let's talk about the generic nature of lookup tables. So lookup tables are something very generic. are very flexible, so they can be created as need be, mainly driving pricing, but they can also be used to drive other application behavior, reference by lookup table to externalize data for scripts and other means. And let's quickly create one. So you see there's a ERP ID, which would automatically enable the replication from ERP system. And let's look inside. So here you see I have a basic definition of a table. I can add more columns. Let's say I add a sales organization. Right, I can sequence them. Then I can reference certain items. One is, for instance, the fetch record. So with that, I could connect it to something on the quote, for instance, the sales organization. And I can also reference different attributes of that sales organization. So if used in pricing, this would now use quote header attribute sales organization to determine the price record in this table. Right, I can add more fields, target price. I could also include this. Right, so that's not a data record, let's say a price record, and I could add the list price here. Right, so then I activate this price table and I can start uploading and downloading data. Or just add a record. Right, we did choose it contains validity, so I can choose the validity and then add data. So that was a quick detour in the flexibility of lookup tables. Let me also quickly mention that feature prices, so prices for attribute values that I selected in the configuration, is also driven by, in this case, by lookup tables. So here you see the feature prices. And when we look back into our application, let's take, for instance, the forklift as an example. What we covered in the pricing scheme is basically the list price through a lookup into country and standard list price. And here the variant price summarizes the feature selections in the configurations. Let's go back into the pricing schema on the right side and see what the other pricing steps entail. So let's look, for instance, in a few examples. So here, for instance, the material costs. So this is a Groovy script, which also does some logic here, but in general that could be doing anything. So Groovy scripts are general purpose programming language. They could also call external services and do whatever a customer wants it to do. What I like also to highlight is, for instance, the country discount. So that's an example where the lookup table doesn't contain prices itself, but discounts. So the account discount would work in a similar fashion. Let's maybe look at the percentage discount. So that's simply defined as a percentage on a certain pricing step. Another example which we have is here the summary of or the aggregated price of all subline items. So that would drive, for instance, the price of the Authentic solution here. The aggregated price, of course, we could also aggregate costs and other things. Another example is simple profit calculation here. So that is again an arithmetic expression, and the margin is similar. Let's preempt at this point in time already integration topics. So you saw that we had a Groovy script for costs. So this could call external services, and another way to integrate with external systems is table replication and getting prices pushed through a middleware. Something I would like to highlight at this stage, so this might look a little bit complex, so that's, I would say, a little bit the super pricing schema, which would work for almost any customer. And something which I would like to highlight is that we can also download the price schema definition as an Excel. So this contains the whole definition of the schema, and this can be used to upload into other systems. And with this, we can use templates and share this with customers. So at this stage, it's probably also a good time to talk about SAP-driven scenarios. So we have three standard scenarios. So one is where we use the SAP configuration and pricing directly. The second is where the configuration is run on our side, and we use pricing from SAP. The third one is where we do cost calculations, so for engineering and contract manufacturing. For the standard LOVC variant configuration models, we would directly use the variant configuration from SAP, run it in our systems, replicate the material master, the variants, which are actually pre-configured products, and the pricing procedure, and run it on our side. We also have the option to run configuration on our side with SAP materials. So we would then use for pricing order simulation in SAP. And the third option is that we replicate cost or price tables from ERP and build on top. So that's often used for engineering project kind of calculations, or contract manufacturing to calculate the cost and price of a part. So how does that look like? In our system, so we can replicate a couple of master data. We use standard BAPIs on SAP side to get the details for material master, account master, equipments, and those kind of things. Here we see the trigger to do this manually. Usually we pull the data through batch processes, as we see here, and to flag accounts and materials and so on, the customer can create custom views in SAP which flag the materials that we pull over. So here we see one of them. So this is the material view, and there are a few selection conditions here. So you see we flag special products here, but that could be also limited to sales org, limited to certain material types, or the like, whatever the customer thinks are sellable products. Let's have a look at an example. So on the left, the product in our system, which runs the constraints which are defined in SAP here. So for instance, there's a rule which defines the dependency between the multimedia package and the speaker, the selection of certain attributes shows and hides the software. And so it's a one-to-one execution of the SAP model in our system, and we can influence certain things on top. And we also can run the pricing from SAP in our system. So there are a few more things to say. How can I, let's say, influence the pricing? How can I make custom calls to ERP for ATP check and delivery times and all those kind of things? We will pick this up in the integration chapter. So before we go into the custom integration topics, let's pick a few gimmicks. So for instance, how we can configure the home screen. That's very nice and simple. So it has dedicated work center, which is the widget administration. So we can define a widget profile for certain roles, which summarizes sections, and in the sections there are certain widgets, and the widget administration is like this. Let's take open opportunities, for instance. So what we can do in here, we can define colors, and when we save the change, we can see a preview. So these are kind of preset widgets, which however are very flexible to configure. So we have certain data sets. We can define saved searches, which are filters on the data. So you could generate, for instance, open opportunities per stage now, but you can also filter this for a certain sales area and show that certain operators are there and so on. So that's a very nice and easy to use feature. Another thing which I would like to highlight is our guided selling, which is also a very nice admin center. So that's how it looks like. So you can define a kind of questionnaire or categories to reach certain products. So here, for instance, for telco equipment, and go through that questionnaire. And the admin center is here. So when we go back, we can see there's a kind of guide. So what's your transmission technology? You can add answers, reference products or product tags, and then walk the customer through until he reaches the products. There's also a kind of matching strategy which works in the way that it collects tags and then calculates the best match, so that you always have something relevant that you can show to the user. Two more gimmicks I like to show. So we have different kind of tools for visualization. 3D visualization is one thing. Schematic visualizations are another example, but we also have, for instance, here integration with Google. So here you see a solar power system, and you have this map integration. You can here, for this basic example, you can, for instance, define an area where you want to install a solar power system. So you can see certain parameters, but let's quickly see how this is being used. So you see it auto calculates here the amount of cables and mountings and so on which you need, and this is based on the fact that the configuration can read from the Google Maps pane and read certain coordinates and other things. And so this is the area, and based on that we can, for instance, calculate those kind of things. The other example which I wanted to highlight too is the CAD generation. So when we go back to the example that we had previously on the linear motor, we saw that there are certain parameters generated by the configuration which can be actually used as input for CAD drawing. So similar to what we see here, right? Certain reference points, and they can be also customized. So you could change certain things if there's a specific customer request. And there's a way to integrate with AutoCAD Forge. And you can generate CAD drawings and generate CAD files or PDF files. So let's look how this one looks like. So that are now the main points of the linear motor. And let me use this as a transition to talk about Groovy scripts, because this is, for instance, the interaction with AutoCAD Forge that uses Groovy script. In general, Groovy is one way to interact with external systems. It's a general purpose language, which is quite nice. So the syntax is similar to Java in a way, executes on the Java virtual machine and is stored within the customer tenant. So it doesn't interact directly with the code of InMineCloud. There are certain well-defined inputs and outputs, and there's a well-defined set of extension points where you can trigger Groovy scripts. So the set of those extension points is growing as customers have certain requirements, and it can be not only used to talk to external APIs like CAD, what we will look at in a moment, but it can be also used to achieve certain internal functionalities that can be implemented by a partner or the customer to achieve certain behavior. So Groovy scripts are in general developed outside of the systems, not like IMC script. And let me quickly find the example for the linear motor. So that's the example here. As I said, general purpose programming language. Here it controls the APIs of AutoCAD Forge and draws certain elements. Let me show a few other examples in the system. So this is an example for integration with SAP, which is obviously a little bit more complicated. That's a special use case example for creating new products, new materials in SAP. So for every of our standard integration with SAP, we also can provide customers with corresponding Groovy script template, and they can start customizing from there. So they don't need to start from scratch. And the other way to integrate with us are our open APIs. So there's a lot of APIs available for the customers to push certain data, mostly via middleware, but it could be also point-to-point. So some of our customers push, for instance, data from the ERP to us. Some of our customers use, for instance, the Quote API, for instance, to generate quotes in our system with a certain presets of attributes. So there are various options how this can be used: outbound communication through Groovy, interaction with the system from the outside with APIs, and we have also the option that we can send notifications to a middleware on certain actions, so they can trigger a more complex integration flow on their side.